This country are dying in poverty, but the growing demand for state-funded funerals is a worrying sign of a deepening crisis. Once known as paupers' funerals, public health funerals are rising at an unsustainable rate. Researchers are linking this trend to the growing deprivation among the elderly. Faith leaders say it's a call to uphold dignity and compassion for all, even in death. Joining us is Evie King, former stand-up comedian turned council funeral arranger and author of Ashes to Admin. She also leads the UK's training programme for council funeral staff and brings rare insight into what happens when someone dies with no one to arrange their funeral. Thanks ever so much for being with us to talk about this really sad topic. So what are the circumstances in which someone would find themselves in this situation where there was no one around and effectively the state had to step in?
Oh, yeah, I mean, they're myriad, because the Act we work under says we need to arrange a funeral one is not likely to be arranged, and that can encompass estrangement. Some people drift from their families. It can encompass outliving. Some people just get to the end and everyone they've ever known has died before them. And that being no natural order, really, we like to think there is, but our children can predecease us, our partner can get dementia. There's all sorts of things that can create that situation. There's people who live a solitary life by choice. There's people who live a solitary life not by choice. And there's also people who don't have money, and that's the growing category. And so in all of those circumstances where a funeral is not likely to be arranged, the council have a legal duty to ensure one is.
And I would have thought in the latter and the growing category, those who just don't have the funds to pay for their own funeral, you might be aware of that. You know, there might be family members who say, look, we can't afford it. They didn't leave any money in order to be able to pay for this. But for the others, for the sort of isolation, how do you even find out about them? What happens? What's the sort of process in which you then get informed and have to step in?
Yeah, I mean, we'll get a call from the coroner or the police, because typically if someone's been alone, it will be a while before someone notices, and then the police will perform a welfare check and enter the property, break in the door or go in the window, and then we will be asked secondary to go in and do a house search, which is sort of part clean up, because we have to make sure that all the perishable food's out. You know, you've had your last dinner, it's on the sideboard. We're getting rid of all of that. We're taking your bin out one last time, but we're also looking for you, and so we're looking for address books. We're looking at last numbers dialed. We're hoping your phone isn't locked, but that's never going to happen. So I beseech people listening to have an address book, please, or a list of people we should call. And we're also there for the admin from my book title. We want to look for your will, your wishes, your bank statements, so that we can inform and freeze. There's a lot of loose ends that need to be tied. So we're really there for those purposes. And the people's lives crystallise as you do that. And then you can go knock on the neighbour's door. You can start going on Facebook groups for where you knew they grew up. And you'd be surprised. There's so many connections we make. There's 6 degrees of separation all over the place. And you find people. And it doesn't have to be family. It can be found family. It can be friends. It can be all sorts of people.
And these people that you are trying to contact, is that in order to attend a funeral, to inform what should happen at this state-funded funeral?
Yeah, I'm either looking for next of kin to whom I can say, would you like to take over the arrangements? And sometimes they do. We're chiefly trying to get it back to the family if that dynamic is there to be had. And if not, we're looking for information, because I have to register the death as well. And there's lots of questions on the death certificate, you know, marital status, maiden name, occupation while living, place of birth. I want those things completed. And those questions, rudimentary, can be so fascinating. I asked the care home marital status, and they said, married for a week, but no one was allowed to speak of it. So it's fascinating.
Oh, okay.
Suddenly all this stuff comes through. You don't have to look very far before you start seeing this person come to life again. And you can really, and once you've found a few key people, you've got your songs, you've got your stories, and sometimes you've got people who will take it back. But ultimately, we want people to be there on the day.
And the funerals that you arrange where sadly there isn't anyone, or maybe there's only 1 or 2 people who didn't know the deceased very well, the person very well, but you know they were neighbours and they're willing to attend. That must be deeply sad.
They can be oddly special. Right. We had one last week where the guy, his sister was in end-of-life care, far away, couldn't come. and he didn't have any real other connections. But his carer absolutely adored him and was sitting there crying her eyes out. But also a lovely stranger from the internet, because I was looking for his friends from back when he used to gig in Brighton. I never did find them, but she stepped forward and said, well, I'll sing him a song. So she played The Parting Glass, and I was in bits because it was so quietly powerful. And this person came and did this. And then when I told his sister, she was absolutely touched because a stranger just came and sang the song. So you get these people who will come. I had an unidentified person, no name. 115 people came because no one can stand the idea that someone would lose their name. So no one's really alone. I think I really want to impress that on people. In a world where we're all lying awake at 3 a.m. going, who's going to find my body? Who's going to sit at the front of my funeral? We're all worried about it, so we won't let anyone else have that situation at all. It's just not going to happen.
Goodness, that's really moving, really beautiful.
It's a lovely job.
For the families who just cannot afford, and that's the growing category, the people who just cannot afford to do this.
Yeah.
I suppose part of your job is as well sort of making them feel better about it, because, you know, that sort of feeling, I've got to do the best for my loved one, I've got to give them the send-off that they absolutely deserved, but I can't. That must really weigh heavily.
You're trying to make people feel comfortable in the situation because there is a degree of shame involved. It shouldn't be, but there is. And grief mixed up with all these other things. And the last thing you want to be doing is scrambling around for money when you're grieving. I mean, it's really, sometimes people aren't aware of our duty, and they've been trying to get DWP assistance, which is very limited. There's a funeral fund, but everyone in the family has to be on qualifying benefits. So that's hardly anyone, isn't it? You know, if you've got a part-time job at Asda, you're deemed rich. So that's that. So it takes them a few weeks to find us sometimes. And that's a few weeks of sleepless nights. And I had one woman, I said to her, here's your options, here's what we can do. You sleep on it and I'll speak to you in the morning. And in the morning I said, how are you doing? And she said, it's the first time I slept since he died. Because that weight was on her. And it's nice to be able to lift that weight and just say, yes, it's going to be arranged by the council. It sounds very, procedural, but it's a real funeral. It will look like a real funeral. It's in the same crematorium. No one will know. And it's your chance to say goodbye. So you hand it over to them. I hand them to the celebrant or to the religious representative, and they build the service. I step back at that point.
And in terms of, I mean, you obviously do an amazing job. But is the system as it stands? Is it fit for purpose? Is it big enough and robust enough to deal with this growing need?
No. So the system at the moment, first of all, the Act needs to change. The Act was enacted in 1984 before the funeral grant was withdrawn. So it didn't anticipate family. It didn't anticipate people. It says found dead. So it's anticipating homeless people found on the street or the unidentified or those with no one to enact. And it only, therefore, provides for a cremation or burial. It's very clear. It just says cremation or burial. That can be read and sometimes is read as no funeral. So there will be some districts where you die where you cannot have a service. It's just a disposition, which is troubling to me. So I've been writing to the government constantly saying, could you update the law? Because they did issue good practice guidance in 2020. And if they could just formalise that and put that into the law, we could then provide a funeral for everyone. But the other stress is the funeral part, the hire of the celebrant and the priest, the hire of the space, adds another sort of £600 to £800 to the cost. And when we're all going bankrupt, it's quite hard to justify that. So the government also needs to look at how they're going to tackle this from their end, because the DWP can't help hardly anyone. When I phoned them the other day to report a death, the woman said, would you like any information about the funeral fund? And I said, oh, no, I don't need it. And she said, yeah, it's not much use anyway. So even they say it. And it's just like, it's unfit for purpose. So I really feel the government needs to look at this from the top and say, make it part of the national insurance provision, make it part of the NHS journey. You know, it used to be cradle to grave. We say that still. It's left in our language as a footprint, but it's not true. So it should be truly cradle to grave again. Or we procure a financial contract with a funeral director for half price, because it sounds bad, but we're buying in bulk. So if we can do that as a small council, imagine the buying power of the national government. They could make an NFS alongside the private sector and just help people, because 1 in 5 can't afford it, and that's not sustainable.
Evie King, thank you so much. Genuinely, not only for coming on the radio and telling us all about it, but thank you for doing what you do, because it's a really important job. Evie King, former stand-up comedian turned council funeral arranger and author of Ashes to Admin, how illuminating that was. Goodness gracious me. Oh, I need a moment, actually.